My name is Gavin Esler. I'm an author and journalist and broadcaster, formerly with the BBC. I was the chief North America correspondent, Newsnight anchor, and had various other jobs with the BBC. I'm the author of 10 books, 5 of fiction and 5 of non-fiction. And the most recent book is non-fiction. It's called Britain is Better Than This. And I think in a world in which in Britain, where we don't agree about much, I think we can possibly agree that we've been underachieving in the past few years. So I want to begin by saying that I'm always keen to meet and talk with people who want to solve problems, not create them. And we've got plenty of people who want to create problems. And that's why I thought Brexit was one of the worst unforced political errors, perhaps ever, but certainly the worst since Suez in 1956, or appeasement in the 1930s, although actually I think at the start appeasement was a reasonable thing to do, even though we abandoned it, or the Corn Laws, which lasted from 1815 to 1849 and slowed the industrialization of Victorian Britain. It was an act of self-harm, as Suez, appeasement and Brexit have been. Now, it took more than 30 years for sanity to prevail with the Corn Laws, when they were consigned to the dustbin of history. What's interesting is that what happened at that time was the repeal of the Corn Laws split the Conservative Party. And this may sound familiar, as post-Brexit political failings have split the Conservative Party again. I would suggest you could say almost in 3 directions. Now, I don't know if history is repeating itself, and I don't know if Brexit will ever be completely reversed. But I do know that in meeting after meeting and propelled by the Trump eccentricity in Washington, Mr. Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, may be heading in the right direction, but very slowly, like a glacier melting, and we shall see. Perhaps when I've finished saying my bit, we can discuss a bit about what should happen next, and I'd be interested in hearing your views. So, to business. The political failings of Brexit. Maybe we should begin with one obvious political success of Brexit. It appears to have destroyed the Conservative Party in the 2020s. Absolutely extraordinary, just as effectively as it destroyed the Tories in the 1800s, perhaps for a generation as it did then. The Conservatives, in my lifetime and yours, were generally regarded as the most successful political party in democratic history. Just a couple of facts. Between 1886 and 1997, the Conservatives were in government for an astonishing 77 out of those 111 years. Since 2010, however, Conservative leaders have been, well, shall we say, less competent than Margaret Thatcher. And this is not about how great she was or otherwise. You may not have liked her, but she was certainly competent. She knew what she was doing. Not everyone liked her. But she did what she said. She set objectives, she had a strategy, and then she worked on tactics. And actually, Tony Blair, whether you like him or not, he had objectives, he had a strategy, and he worked on tactics. Unfortunately, it seems to me that one of the political failings of Brexit has been that modern conservatism since 2010 has worked in reverse. There's been a lot of tactics and a little bit of strategy, but they've not quite figured out what the final objective is except to stay in power. David Cameron's a good example. Faced with the problem of Nigel Farage and UKIP, as we all know, Mr. Cameron came up with a cunning plan. He forced a referendum on the British people based on 16 words. It was not a policy. It was not a real plan. It was not an objective. It was not even a binding referendum because nobody really knew what leaving the EU was about. It was a political tactic. And it was a political failure for the Conservatives ultimately, and a failure for our country, in my view, and I suspect in the view of many of those listening. Let's see what Brexit was not, because let's look at some political successes. Brexit was not like the Good Friday Agreement on Northern Ireland and staying within the UK, a referendum based on something that we, the British people, knew what it was about, and particularly in that case, the people of Northern Ireland who had to vote on it, and the Irish Republic. The Good Friday was a referendum based on a 65-page document that every voting household got every home in Northern Ireland got 6 weeks before people voted. It explained in very simple terms, we don't like the violence. We want to move on. We think this is a good way. Nobody gets everything that they want, but we can have a deal and peace. What that meant was an informed electorate in Northern Ireland could make up their minds based on facts, not fantasies, and not on the 16 words of the Brexit referendum, which nobody quite understood. The people of Northern Ireland, the informed people, voted for peace. The uninformed people of the United Kingdom, and that includes me, I didn't know what Brexit was when we voted. We voted for or against 16 words that magically became the self-harm we know as Brexit. And that's the first and most significant political failing of Brexit, from which everything else follows. The key failing is the way it happened. The British people were given a binary choice on a vague question in an advisory referendum, which then magically, because that was the government's decision, became binding in ways to be decided by the very same government that had no mandate for the Brexit agreement they cobbled together. And they didn't put it to a vote. They didn't say, you voted on 16 words on a principle. This is what we're actually going to do. We think you should vote again on whether you agree with it. Because possibly, and I would say almost certainly, we wouldn't have voted for the Brexit agreement we've got. The people of Northern Ireland had 6 weeks to read a 65-page document in 1998. The people of the United Kingdom in 2016 were given these 16 famous words. Should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? That was it. We all know this. We were treated as fools. This was the appeasement of Nigel Farage and UKIP, and of course it failed. It didn't see off Nigel Farage or UKIP in its various guises, the Brexit Party and now its reform. It has seen off, it would seem, for a while, perhaps even a generation, as it did in the 1800s, the Conservative Party instead. Beginning with David Cameron, who we know resigned honourably, it seemed to me, because he presided over an unforced error, a terrible disaster. Followed in succession by Theresa May, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Kemi Badenoch, and whatever unfortunately hapless leader may emerge after Ms. Badenoch gives up, I suspect probably next year. We'll see. That's not really a prediction, but I don't think she can last forever. And I think if there's another series of bad election results, there'll be problems for her next year. So, to repeat a bit of our political history, we know that Boris Johnson didn't care one way or another for or against European Union membership. What we do know he cared about was Boris Johnson. He saw Brexit not as an objective, but as a tactic, as part of his strategy to become Prime Minister. He succeeded for Boris. He failed for the United Kingdom. Well done him, you might say. He also was party to the wrecking of the Conservative Party, and I'll get on to a little bit more of that political failure in a moment, for many years. And he made us as a nation poorer and more divided than we needed to have been. And actually, I have to say, well, let me tell you a quick story. My wife's family she's got many German relatives, and one, a doctor, Uncle Bruno, in the area near Hamburg. They're all very pro-British. They love this country. They come here quite a lot. And Uncle Bruno studied here, actually, in a British hospital. After the Brexit vote, I was sitting in his garden drinking a pint of beer, or probably a litre of beer, actually. And he said to me, "Can you explain Brexit to me?" And I started to explain as best I could. And he was listening, very polite. And he put on his inscrutable doctor's face. And I said, "Bruno, you clearly don't think what I'm saying makes sense. You're the doctor. What's your diagnosis? How do you explain Brexit?" "Well," he said, "I think the English had a headache. So you shot yourselves in the foot. You still have the headache, and now you can't bloody walk." Now, that seems to me a pretty fair diagnosis of a political failure of Brexit. But let's move on. Because Boris Johnson didn't know what Brexit might mean. He's an entertainer. He's not a deep thinker. He didn't understand a lot about how even our country works. He didn't understand that being in the European Union, along with the Good Friday Agreement, ensured that it solved the problem of Ulster. And I mean Ulster, the 9 counties of Ulster, the 3 in the Irish Republic as well. The Northern Ireland border, yes, existed on a map. But because Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic were both in the European Union, it didn't exist in practical terms. So Unionists could have their border on the map. Nationalists could have a border that didn't really exist. And in Northern Ireland, that place I feel very strongly about because I lived there for a number of years, was at peace, largely at peace, after 30 years of troubles and 3,000 dead. Now, if upending that and making it difficult for people, including actually provoking some riots in Belfast in Protestant areas, if that's not a political failing, I don't know what is. And that's just the beginning. Boris Johnson also didn't understand that one of the key reasons the people of Scotland voted against independence in 2014 in their independence referendum was that the leaders of the Conservative, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party went to Scotland and said, in effect, the only way you Scots can guarantee staying in the European Union is to stay in the United Kingdom. And I think that was quite a powerful argument, actually, because given that the secession of Catalonia from Spain would cause problems, the European Union is very keen not to see countries fall apart in any way. The United Kingdom, they didn't say this publicly, but they wanted it to stay united. So a slender majority of Scots, a few percent, voted to stay in by a slender majority, Scotland voted to stay in the United Kingdom, in a large part because of that guarantee, which was known as the vow on the popular Scottish newspaper, the Daily Record. The vow, the 3 politicians came here and said, we'll promise you this and that and the other, including being in the EU. 2 years later, the people of Scotland were taken out of the EU against their will. They voted overwhelmingly to stay. Northern Ireland, knowing what peace mattered to them, voted overwhelmingly to stay. They were taken out predominantly by English votes. And that's the second great failing, political failing of Brexit. It has undermined the unity of the United Kingdom. Now, I believe that the Scottish National Party is in considerable difficulty, but Scottish nationalism, the idea of independence, still gets around 45% of the votes, if according to opinion polls. It's not gone away. I believe it's also possible that in the lifetimes of all of us watching this, actually, Northern Ireland could have another vote to leave the United Kingdom and join the Irish Republic because the demographics of Northern Ireland are changing. And actually, I know a number of people who are fundamentally unionists, but they've got Irish passports as well, because that is very useful. And I suspect many of you watching would rather like one too. Now, Boris Johnson, to continue one of the other political failures, the question of splits. It happened after the Corn Laws, the Conservative Party split. And Boris Johnson split the party by getting rid of talented pro-Europeans, including David Gauke, Dominic Grieve, Justin Greening, Oliver Letwin, Rory Stewart, and many others. They effectively left the party. Some of them were booted up into the House of Lords, where they could cause less trouble. So our talk tonight is entitled The Political Failings of Brexit. And I believe that effectively kicking out some of these best brains in politics, and again, this is not about whether you're a Conservative or not, but these are big brain people, means that the Conservative Party of 2025 is itself one of those failings of Brexit. Does it, do you think, resemble the party of Margaret Thatcher, where big brains, even if she didn't like them, she called some of them wets, they were at least tolerated and actually promoted. Now, if you wanted a really short talk, I'd point to the political successes of Brexit. Well, they include the fact that Sinn Féin, once the political arm of the IRA, is now in government in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin, as I've suggested, may indeed persuade the people of Northern Ireland, who would have come from communities that might not have liked Sinn Féin 20 years ago, but they might be persuaded to join the Irish Republic. Another political success, actually, is David Frost. He's now Lord Frost, and he's the person who produced the Brexit deal that made us all so much richer and happier and united, and ensured that on every European vacation, we get to spend more time standing at passport control in absurdly long queues while our Irish friends go through in seconds. I confess I'm slightly fascinated by Lord Frost. He holds a first-class honours degree in French and history from St John's College, Oxford. Why I'm fascinated is I wondered, what did he learn about history when he was at Oxford? Because in what Lord Frost, David Frost then, clearly thought was a major speech in Brussels during the Brexit negotiations, he suggested that the United Kingdom didn't fit with Europe because, as he put it, our political system just evolved while the Europeans had revolutions and other such trouble. Now, I've got friends who've been to Oxford. I didn't go to Oxford. I went to somewhere, a couple of other universities. But I wondered, does an Oxford degree in history not include some obvious facts about how the British system did not just evolve? Did Lord Frost at Oxford never hear about the Gunpowder Plot, where Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up the government and the king? That wasn't just evolving. Did Oxford University history teaching fail to mention the execution of Charles I? I don't think that was just evolving. Or the Glorious Revolution. Now there's a clue. The Glorious Revolution, when a foreign king, William of Orange in 1688, led an invasion to occupy the United Kingdom with an army primarily of foreigners, Dutch, Danish, Huguenots, Germans, and there were Scottish, English, and Irish Protestants too, but it was mostly foreigners. We were invaded. It wasn't just 1066. We were actually invaded. It was welcomed by many people, including my ancestors who were Protestant, but it was still an invasion. It didn't just evolve. And did he miss the Gordon riots, the suffragettes, or the breakup of the United Kingdom in the 1920s? This is a bit that also causes me great amusement. I talk to a lot of audiences around the country, and I usually say, do you remember being taught in history at the end of World War I, how much land did Germany lose? Nobody usually comes up with the correct figure. It was 13% under the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, and it caused great resentment and led to the rise of Hitler and other things. But Germany lost 13%. Then I say, at the end of World War I, how much land did the United Kingdom lose? And everybody says, except in Belfast, none. But in Belfast, they know that Britain, at the end of World War I, lost 22% of its landmass when the 26 counties of Ireland seceded. So I digress, but it does seem to me interesting that the person who negotiated Brexit, who has got an academic qualification of a first-class honours degree in French and history, doesn't seem to understand the political history of the country, which he thinks just evolved, when we've actually been quite a violent country in our history. So here's a quick summary so far. Brexit is a cause of some of our political and constitutional failings, and also a result of some of our political and constitutional failings. More positively, I think, Brexit has also proved a bit of a catalyst to end two of the great failings of modern British society: our complacency about, the Westminster system is the envy of the world. I don't think you'll find that in many places anymore. And our nostalgia, and they're both connected. And the link between nostalgia and Brexit is itself obvious. We all heard during the Brexit campaign people saying, we want our country back, not forwards, but back. Well, going back in a way has been achieved. Economic growth has been set back. Control of immigration actually has been set back, as we have been hearing today from Keir Starmer, and some of the quite shocking figures about how net migration to this country shot up. Now, that's a debate for another day. But we were supposed to get, if we left the European Union, more control over migration. It seems we ended up with less control for various reasons. Our need for cheap labour is being filled not here in Kent, where I live, by seasonal European workers who come over, return to their home countries, but often by migrants from outside Europe. Our universities have been set back. The University of Kent, I was Chancellor for 10 years, had a campus in Brussels. That's now closed. We had many arrangements with European universities. They continue, but the post-Brexit bureaucracy makes this warm relationship with our closest neighbours very difficult. So I want to leave time for some dialogue and questions. So let's move on to complacency, because it's connected with nostalgia. And it's part of the political failings of Brexit, exposed by Brexit and continued by Brexit. We were all brought up to believe that the United Kingdom effectively had a two-party political system, government and opposition separated by two swords' lengths across the benches of the House of Commons. I don't think many people truly believe we have a two-party system now. We do have a two-party system, or a system of electing governments which favours two parties, and they may change. It's a first-past-the-post system. Now, if you ask yourself, which other country in Europe has such a system? The answer is there's only one, and it's Belarus, and that's a dictatorship of Mr. Lukashenko. We have an upper chamber, the House of Lords, which is also uniquely weird, actually, and open to abuse. Now, I should say I have met many, many members of the House of Lords in my career, and almost to a man and woman, I admire them greatly because they tend to have been great public servants. They tend to have served in the military. They tend to have served in other parts of public life, and they're great. But it's still, for about, I think it's 92 members, a hereditary peerage. And the House of Lords is the only parliamentary chamber anywhere in the world in which members of the state religion, the Church of England, have seats as of right, except for Iran. Now, I have nothing against bishops of the Church of England, although they have their own problems and scandals. But it does seem to me bizarre that a church where most British people don't go, and again, people go to any church, that's fine, or a mosque or a synagogue or whatever they choose to do in terms of worship. But why should those people? Why should the hereditary peers? And why should anybody that Boris Johnson or any prime minister cares to nominate be in the ever-expanding House of Lords, which was supposed to be cut very severely by Tony Blair, and it's now back over 800 members again. Since Brexit, we are witnessing, therefore, not just the failure of individual politicians, we are witnessing systemic failure, the failure of the traditional British political system. And the evidence is clear. Let me just focus, in conclusion, on one particular point. If you do the figures, if apathy were a political party in post-Brexit Britain, apathy would be in government, not bothered. Think about those figures. Think about how many of our fellow citizens, perhaps ones you know, and ones I know certainly, who could vote, don't do it. They don't bother. For example, those local elections, recent elections, were trumpeted in newspapers as the rise of reform, and that's true up to a point. Nigel Farage's party clearly joins the Liberal, Democrats, the Greens, Labour and the Conservatives, plus in Scotland the SNP, Plaid Cymru in Wales and Northern Ireland parties in our very complex political arrangements. This is not a two-party country, yet we retain the myth of a two-party system, and that affects the way we vote, and it also turns people off. One of the reasons in the 2024 general election that 40% of the voting age population, those who could have voted, didn't vote. Some of them weren't registered. Many of them just stayed at home. But 40% didn't vote. And this was a Labour landslide based on 1/3 of those who did cast votes. They got 2/3 of the seats. Now, if you do the mathematics, 40% of us who could have voted didn't vote. And of the 60% who did vote, about a third, about 20%, voted for a Labour landslide. And again, I'm not criticising the Labour government. They took advantage of it. Tories would have done it. Any party would have done it. But we have a government that won 2/3 of the seats in our parliament based on 1/3 of the votes cast. And that works out at just 1/5 of those who could have voted. So Brexit has exposed many of our problems. It's the cause, but it's also the result of some of our problems. This is not about failed personalities, although there have been plenty of those. Liz Truss is obviously one of them. It's not even about failed policies, although Brexit, it seems to me, is clearly a failure, and to most British people, even those who voted for it. It's about a failure of our political system. And this is why I say Britain is better than this, because we have more Nobel Prize winners at one university, which is not the one Lord Frost went to, it's Cambridge. We have more Nobel Prize winners at one university than any country in the world except the United States and Britain itself. We're not stupid. We have many, you will all know very talented people in your own life. I'm sure many of you are very talented people too. But this is a political system in which one Prime Minister, David Cameron, for his own political reasons, because he had a little problem, could force a vote on an ill-thought-out referendum that he declared was merely advisory, which then magically became binding. The result was the badly thought-out deal negotiated by David Frost. We're better than this. And one final thought. Proportional representation systems have their difficulties. Just ask the Germans, ask the French, ask the Italians. But at least they give us as citizens a sense that every vote counts. In the UK, we have a sense that in some areas, in some constituencies, our votes are wasted, so why bother? Proportional representation systems are good enough all across Europe, except Belarus. They're also good enough for our friends in Scotland, in Wales and Northern Ireland. They've got PR, but England has left out, and UK general elections are left out. Brexit always seemed to me a moment where unscrupulous politicians played the idea of British nostalgia is one of the motivators, and they jumped on that. I want my country back. I want my country forward. Britain is better than this. Brexit has failed. The Brexit referendum remains a blight on our political history, along with the Corn Laws and appeasement and Suez, and is less rational, it seems to me, than appeasement, because that had a purpose at the beginning, I suppose. In every case, it took time and effort to put things right. But I'm also an optimist. I believe Brexit is clearly brain dead. All we need now is to find a way of burying it. Thank you very much.